It was an interview that peeled back layers many of us have long wondered about. Meri Brown, the very first wife in the Sister Wives family, recently sat down with TJ Holmes and Amy Robach on their podcast I Do Part 2. Now, for context, these two hosts aren't strangers to controversy. They were once co-hosts of a national morning show, but when their own relationship came to light, while both were still married at the time, their careers exploded in scandal. That downfall eventually led them to start this new podcast, where they focus on second chances, life after heartbreak, and rebuilding from the ashes. And it was there that Meri finally spoke openly about the life she once lived, the beliefs that trapped her, and what it really meant to walk away from both polygamy and the faith that shaped her entire identity. The conversation was raw. It wasn't just lighthearted chat about dating after divorce or what life looks like on the other side of reality TV. No, they went deep, asking Meri about her decision to leave Kody, about stepping away from her religion, and about what it feels like to enter the dating world after years of living under rules she no longer believes in. And Meri didn't hold back. One of the most shocking admissions she made was that, for years, she was caught inside what she now describes as a cult. She explained that her marriage to Kody wasn't simply about love or choice. It was about survival in the belief system she was born into. From the time she was a little girl, she was taught that if she wanted to reach the celestial kingdom, if she wanted eternal salvation, she had to marry into this lifestyle. She had to submit to polygamy. In her own words, it wasn't optional. It was the only path to heaven. But what makes her confession even more striking is that she revealed she had been questioning those beliefs long before cameras ever started rolling. Long before Sister Wives premiered and presented their family as a shiny, happy example of plural marriage, Meri was privately wrestling with doubts. This echoes what Christine has also admitted, that even while filming, they were often saying things on camera that didn't match what they really felt. They were selling an image of plural marriage that, behind closed doors, was crumbling under the weight of jealousy, pain, and unspoken resentment. Think about it, the Brown family always insisted they weren't like the Warren Jeffs-style communities. They emphasized that their marriages were about choice, about love, about freedom. "We're not a cult," they would say. "We're just a big, happy family living our faith." That was the message fed to millions of viewers. But here we have Meri herself admitting, no, actually it was cult-like. That much of what they promoted to the world was a facade, designed to normalize something that inside their own home was leaving deep emotional scars. When asked what started her doubts, Meri said something heartbreaking. Every single time something went wrong in that community, she was blamed. No matter the situation, the finger always pointed at her. If her marriage with Kody was strained, it was her fault. If she struggled with infertility, it was her fault, her body's failure. If she felt jealous when another wife came into the family, it was her flaw. And when she began questioning her religion, that too she knew would make her wrong. So she kept silent, bearing those doubts deep inside for years. Can you imagine the loneliness of carrying that kind of secret burden? Meri described her journey away from the faith as slow, almost invisible at first. She believes her doubts started even before the family's big move to Las Vegas, possibly as far back as when the show was first being discussed, nearly 2 decades ago. And yet she couldn't tell a soul. Not Kody, not her sister wives, not even her closest confidants. Because in that world, questioning meant you were broken. And Meri already lived with enough blame to drown in. And here's where her story hits a nerve, because it isn't just about polygamy. This is about what happens in any system that thrives on control. She talked about how religion was used to make her feel perpetually unworthy, perpetually wrong. And as she spoke, it reminded me of something many people can relate to, even outside of polygamy. That constant message, you are the problem. You are never enough. If you only obey more, sacrifice more, submit more, then maybe, just maybe, you'll finally be accepted. Hearing Meri speak about this, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sorrow and admiration. Because yes, she stayed in that system for decades. And yes, she played a part in promoting an image on television that wasn't entirely true. But she was also surviving in an environment designed to erode her self-worth, to make her doubt every instinct she had. It's no wonder she clung to the hope that maybe if she just tried harder, she'd finally feel peace. And haven't so many of us been there in our own way? Maybe not in a polygamist marriage, but in families, religions, or relationships where the message was always the same. You are to blame. You're the reason things aren't working. If you were only better, things would finally change. And after years of being told that lie, after years of swallowing guilt and shame, you wake up and realize, no, the system itself is broken. The promises were empty, and the suffering wasn't leading to blessings. It was just keeping you trapped. That's what makes Meri's words so powerful. They show us not just the cracks in her marriage, but the cracks in the entire foundation that Sister Wives was built upon. And whether you've loved her or criticized her over the years, moments like this force us to see her humanity, to see the years of invisible damage she carried, and to wonder how many others are still trapped in similar systems, still too afraid to question, still convinced that their suffering is the price of salvation? One of the hardest truths about sister wives, and I don't think even the women themselves fully realize this yet, is the way the show damaged them, not just privately, but publicly as well. Because here's the reality. By sitting in front of the cameras, smiling, and insisting that everything was fine, they weren't just lying to themselves. They were lying to the audience too, and as viewers, we reacted to that dishonesty. We judged them harshly because from the outside it looked so obvious. Why are you still fighting over this man? Can't you see he's mistreating you? Can't you see you deserve more than the crumbs Kody was giving? But what we didn't fully understand at the time was the invisible chains keeping them locked in place. This wasn't just about love or family ties, it was indoctrination. And in a system built like that, anytime one of them tried to break free or even breathe a little independently, the gaslighting came crashing down. Think about Meri. Every time she tried to spread her wings, to explore her own identity, she was met with manipulation. Robin would guilt her by saying, "Don't go to college, you'll be abandoning me. Don't pursue that, because I only joined this family because of you." And Kody? He kept her on a pendulum, swinging back and forth between affection and rejection, keeping her off balance, never knowing where she truly stood. And then layered on top of all, that was the crushing weight of her religious guilt. She wasn't just disappointing Kody, she believed she was disappointing God. And this is where the show, instead of being an empowering platform, did real harm. Because if Meri, or any of them, had grown up in an environment where their worth wasn't tied to obedience, where education and independence were encouraged rather than shamed, who knows what they could have accomplished? Instead, they were told their only value was in being wives and mothers. And in Meri's case, she was ridiculed because her body only allowed her one child. Imagine the humiliation, being told your worth is tied to motherhood, and then being made to feel broken because you couldn't have more. She was expected to smile while her husband slept with other women. And if she dared to feel hurt, if jealousy crept in, she was told she was the problem. Not Kody, not the unfairness of the system. Her, always her. She was the one who needed to fix her emotions, who needed to swallow the pain, because this was the path to heaven. And if she couldn't handle it, then clearly she wasn't faithful enough. That's the mind game that kept her silent for so many years. And suddenly, so many of her behaviors make sense. The way she clung to her own house, the way she guarded her personal space from the other wives and even the children. At the time, it looked cold, even cruel. But now, it looks like survival. If you are living in a family you don't fully believe in anymore, if you're constantly questioning why you're even there, then of course you carve out a corner of the world that's just yours. Of course you demand some autonomy. That was the only place she could breathe, the only space where she wasn't being constantly told she was wrong. The heartbreaking part is that trust inside this family was nearly impossible. The wives couldn't confide in each other because anything they said could be twisted, repeated to Kody, and turned into ammunition. Imagine living in a world where your sister wives are also your competition, where secrets are dangerous, and where opening up means punishment. You end up on eggshells, constantly censoring yourself, never sure who you can really trust. And even when you did try to share your pain, you'd be met with more gaslighting. You're overreacting. You need to just do better. You need to stop being selfish. Over and over again. And when you look at Christine's book, it becomes clear that even she, one of the women many fans see as the bravest, still struggled to fully empathize with Meri. Christine describes the difficulty of living alongside her, the coldness, the distance. But what Christine didn't fully see at the time was that Meri was a mirror of what she herself would later become. Because once Robin entered the picture, Christine's role in the family shifted. Suddenly, Christine was the one left out, the one sidelined, the one being made to feel inadequate and disposable. In so many ways, Christine became what Meri had been living all along. That's the twisted tragedy of this family dynamic. The cycle repeated itself, wife after wife, each one eventually learning that in Kody's world, you are either the favorite or you are nothing. When you step back and look at Christine's journey, it's almost haunting to see how history repeated itself. Once Robin entered the picture, Christine found herself in the very position Meri had been stuck in for years. Suddenly, Christine was the one battling jealousy. She was the wife struggling to hold it together, the one whose emotions kept spilling over. She clashed with Kody, she confronted Robin, sometimes directly, sometimes passive-aggressively. She lashed out, she tiptoed, she swung between anger and silence. And isn't that exactly what we saw with Meri years before? But here's the thing, we can't blame Christine for that. None of this was her fault. Her reactions weren't signs of weakness or immaturity. They were the natural responses of a woman who was having her heart broken in real time. She was watching her husband shift his affection, his loyalty, his very presence toward another wife. How could anyone remain calm in that situation? And yet, if Christine could ever step fully into Meri's shoes, she might recognize that what she was experiencing was exactly what Meri had already endured. That's one of the most insidious aspects of this entire system. When you trap multiple women in a structure designed to pit them against each other, empathy becomes almost impossible. Each woman is drowning in her own pain, her own trauma. And when you're in survival mode, when every day feels like a fight just to stay afloat, you don't have the emotional capacity to see anyone else's suffering. And that, I believe, is by design. Because if everyone is stuck in fight or flight, if everyone is consumed by their own heartbreak and insecurity, then the man at the top, the so-called head of the family, retains total control. Divide and conquer, keep them jealous, keep them mistrustful, keep them second-guessing themselves and each other. That is how power works in these dynamics. So when Christine recalls her experiences with Meri, yes, she may be telling the truth about how difficult Meri could be. She may be right that Meri yelled at the kids, or that Meri was cold, or that Meri lashed out in her own moments of despair. But that doesn't mean Meri's story ends there. That doesn't mean it defines her, because Christine herself admitted to her own struggles, her own lashing out, her own inability to contain her emotions. None of these women were villains. They were all victims of the same system, forced into roles that broke them down until they didn't even recognize themselves. And think about the practical side too. Christine had to share her husband with women she didn't necessarily choose. She had to watch her income stretch thinner and thinner across households she didn't always want to be connected to. She had to accept her husband fathering children with women who were, in many ways, her rivals. That's not a normal marriage dynamic. That's an unhealthy environment designed to foster resentment and competition. How could anyone truly thrive in that? And this is why, despite all the conflict between them, I can't help but believe that if Meri and Christine had never been bound together by polygamy, if they had met outside of that cult-like structure, they might have actually been friends because, at their core, they aren't so different. Both strong-willed, both outspoken, both wounded by a man who promised them eternal love but gave them scraps of attention. Their conflict wasn't born out of their true selves. It was born out of the system. Take Meri's need for control, for example. She's often portrayed as rigid, picky, even harsh when it came to her house or her routines. But when you understand trauma, that behavior makes perfect sense. When your larger life feels completely out of control, when your marriage, your faith, and your very identity are slipping through your fingers, you cling tightly to the few areas where you can exert control. For some people, it's food. For others, it's their home. The way things are folded, the way things are organized, the boundaries they enforce. That's not cruelty, that's survival. That's a woman carving out a little bit of stability in a world that refused to give her any. But Meri also admitted that living in this system left scars that followed her into her life after Kody. Today, as she re-enters the dating world, she finds that many men want nothing to do with her once they learn about her past. Not because of who she is now, but because of the stigma attached to where she came from. And that's devastating. She can't change the fact that she was raised in a faith community many people consider dangerous. She can't erase the years of reality TV that immortalized her as Kody's first wife. And for men on the outside, the idea of getting involved with someone who was part of that world can feel like stepping into a storm they don't fully understand. And make no mistake, the world Meri came from was dangerous. These fundamentalist offshoots aren't just quirky religious groups, they're often tangled up in lawlessness, exploitation, and abuse. Some function almost like sovereign nations, ignoring the law, stockpiling illegal weapons, trafficking women and children under the guise of faith, and treating basic human rights as optional. For an outsider, dating someone with those ties can feel like inviting all that darkness into your own life. And that's not Meri's fault, but it is the reality she faces. Janelle's story is proof of how easy it is to get sucked in without realizing the risks. She initially approached the lifestyle out of curiosity, almost academically, and before she knew it, she was enmeshed. Her own family recognized it for what it was and tried to pull her out, calling it a cult. When she resisted, they cut ties, and to this day, those wounds remain. That's the ripple effect of systems like this. They don't just break marriages, they break entire families apart. So when you see Meri struggling to date, when you hear her admit how hard it is to rebuild trust, it's not just about personal heartbreak, it's about stigma. It's about the baggage she never asked for, but now has to carry. It's about a world that scarred her, and a public that only sees the reality TV version of her without understanding the damage beneath. And yet, despite everything, her recent interview wasn't bitter. She didn't sit there and trash Kody, even though she easily could have. She spoke about their relationship with an almost detached acceptance. She doesn't want him. She doesn't need him. But she still wishes he could be a better father, a better man. She isn't interested in vengeance. She's interested in moving forward. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all, because after decades of silence, of being blamed, of being gaslit, Meri is finally telling her own story. And maybe now, for the first time in her life, it's her voice that matters most.